Have you bought this crochet kit from Kmart? Are you completely confused by the instructions? If so, know that you're not alone. Throw the instructions away, watch this tutorial instead, and I'll show you how to make these 3 little cacti. This is a very beginner-friendly tutorial. However, I do assume that you know how to do a slip knot, a starting chain, and a single crochet. If this is your first time picking up a crochet hook, take a look in the description where I've included some links to some beginner tutorials. Check those out and then come back here and I'll show you everything else that you need to know to be able to make these 3 cacti. Okay, so to start the soil, you need to do a magic circle. So to do a magic circle, you want to hold your yarn tail facing down between your thumb and first finger, and then wrap the yarn around your first 2 fingers, underneath, and then cross over the top to make an X like so, and just hold it in place with your 3rd finger. Then you want to take your crochet hook, go under this top piece of the X here. You want to hook your head around this piece of yarn here and pull it through, and then twist your hook so it's sitting on top of the X. Next, we're going to grab this strand here with the head of your crochet hook, and you want to pull it through the loop on your hook, and that's magic circle. Then we're going to do 6 single crochets into the magic circle. If this is your first time crocheting, then have a look in the description where I've included a slower tutorial for how to do a single crochet. When we're working into the magic circle, it's just like doing a normal single crochet, except instead of inserting your hook into the stitch, you just insert it into the middle of the circle, and then single crochet as normal. Now we want to mark this stitch as our first stitch. Now with all of the other Kmart crochet kits, they've included some stitch markers, but they don't seem to have included any in this kit, which is a bit of a shame because you really need to use stitch markers if you're working in the round. So I'm going to use my own stitch markers. I actually make these stitch markers myself and sell them in my Etsy store, which I've linked below. However, if you don't have your own stitch markers, you can use bobby pins, safety pins, paper clips as a stitch marker. And essentially what you want to do is to note the stitch as the first stitch in the round by inserting your stitch marker under both prongs of the V of your stitch, and then you want to do 5 more single crochets into the magic circle. Once you've done your 5 single crochets, then you can just pull on your yarn tail, which will close up your magic circle. If you've watched some of my other Kmart kit tutorials, we're actually going to do this one a little bit differently. So all of the other kits that I've done have been joined in continuous rounds, which means you're basically working around in a spiral. However, for this pattern, we're actually going to be working in joined rounds, which is where you do a single round, join it together, chain 1 to add the height of your next row, and then do the 2nd row. If you're new to crochet, I actually recommend using a 2nd stitch marker to mark the last stitch of your round, and that's because the joining stitch and the chain stitch can be easily confused for an actual stitch. So now I've clearly marked my first stitch and my last stitch of the round. So to join our round, we're going to do a slip stitch. So to do a slip stitch, you want to insert your crochet hook back into that first stitch, so the stitch where you had your first stitch marker, and yarn over and pull up a loop, and you'll have 2 loops on your hook. Then you want to pull this loop through the one that was already on your hook, like so, and that's a slip stitch, and that essentially joins our round together. Next we want to do a chain 1, which is our turning chain, which essentially gives us the height for the next round. So to chain, you just want to yarn over and then pull that through the loop on your hook, and there's a chain. So this is where the stitch markers are really useful, because these 2 stitches we've just done, the chain 1 and the slip stitch, are not real stitches and we shouldn't count them in our stitch count. Now for round 2, we're going to do 6 increases. So I'll just show you how that works with the pattern that they have included. So these little X's here represent a single crochet, and the X's with the little arrow underneath it represents an increase. So for round 1 we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 single crochets. Now for round 2 we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 increases. And an increase essentially means that you're doing 2 single crochets into each stitch. So into our first stitch we'll do 1 single crochet, and then we want to mark that first single crochet with our stitch marker because that's our first stitch of round 2. And then we want to do a second single crochet back into that very same stitch. So we go back into that same stitch and do a second single crochet. And that's our first increase. And we're going to do that into each stitch around. So in total, we'll have 12 stitches for round 2. So this is our stitch with our stitch marker, so we know this is our last stitch of the round. So we'll do 2 single crochets into there. And then we'll move our stitch marker into our new last stitch of the round. And now we're going to finish this round off in the same way that we did the last round. So we want to slip stitch back into the first stitch. So we're going to ignore these 2 stitches here, which is our joining stitch and our chain 1 from our last round. And we want to go back into the first stitch of the round, the one that has our stitch marker in it, and do a slip stitch and a chain 1. Now for round 3, we're going to alternate between increases and single crochets. So into the first stitch, we're going to do an increase. Again, don't forget to move your stitch marker. Then into the second stitch, we'll just do a single crochet, and into the third, an increase. And we'll just repeat that pattern around. And again, to finish off the round, we'll slip stitch back to the first stitch and chain 1. Now for round 4, we're going to do an increase followed by 2 single crochets. So into the first stitch, we'll do an increase. A single crochet into the second stitch, and a single crochet into the third stitch, and then repeat that pattern around, so an increase into the next, followed by 2 singles. Slip stitch to join and chain 1. So now you know how to do increases as well as how to join the end of your round and chain 1 before each new round. You can continue following the pattern on the screen, and I'll meet you back here at the start of row 13. So once you've finished round 12, you should have something that looks like this. Now, before we start row 13, which is when we're going to start doing some decreases, now is a good time to weave in your initial yarn tail, so this little tail that pokes through in the middle of your work. Now, a useful way to tell which side is the right side of your work is to look at where your tail is. The tail should be on the inside of your dome, so this here is the right side of the work, and this side, the side with the tail, is the wrong side. So you want to be working this way, so this will be the bit of your soil that is showing. Now, to weave in your end, you just want to take a tapestry needle. I don't believe they include a tapestry needle in this kit. If you are going to buy a tapestry needle, I'd suggest getting a metal one rather than a plastic one. And you specifically want a tapestry needle rather than an embroidery needle. And the difference is just that a tapestry needle actually has a blunt end, so it won't snag on your yarn like an embroidery needle that's designed to go through fabric. So you just want to thread this yarn tail onto your tapestry needle. Now, if you don't have a tapestry needle, you could just tie a knot in this yarn tail if you have no other option. However, there is a risk that it will come undone. So to weave in our end, we're just going to weave in and through a few different stitches, and you want to work in at least 3 different directions and probably under about 5 or 6 stitches to make sure that that tail isn't going to come undone. Now if this side of the work was visible, then we'd want to trim this yarn end, but because it won't be visible, we can leave that end loose as that will form part of our stuffing when we stuff our soil. Now for row 13 we're going to start doing some decreases, so I'll show you how to do an invisible decrease, but first we want to do 3 single crochets in the first 3 stitches. And then in the 4th stitch we're going to do a decrease. So I suggest doing an invisible decrease because this will leave less of a hole or a gap than doing a standard decrease. So to do an invisible decrease, you want to insert your hook under the first prong only of your next stitch. So typically when you're working into a stitch, you work under both parts of the V of the stitch like so, but instead we just want to go under the front prong only. Then you want to swing your crochet hook down so that you can get the head of your hook under the front prong only of the stitch after that as well. So now you'll have 3 loops on your hook. You want to yarn over and pull through those first 2 loops, and you'll have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, and that's an invisible decrease. Then we want to do single crochets into the next 6 stitches. And then an invisible decrease across the next 2. So insert your hook under that front prong only of the first stitch, and then under the front prong only of the stitch after that, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And then just want to repeat this pattern of 6 single crochets increase, 6 single crochets increase, and then for your final round you'll do an increase and then 3 single crochets to finish off the round. Now that you know how to do an invisible decrease, you can follow the instructions on the screen with just a combination of decreases and single crochets. You want to finish each round just as we have been doing, so slip stitch to join your round, chain 1 before starting the new round. And I'll meet you back here at the end of row 22 to show you how to finish off your soil. Okay, so once you've reached the end of row 22, to finish off this row we just want to slip stitch back into the first stitch of row 21. And now our final step is just to fasten off. So to fasten off you want to cut a yarn tail and then just yarn over and pull that yarn tail all the way through the loop on your hook and pull that tight to create a knot, and this will stop your work from coming undone. And now that's our first soil complete. So you just want to repeat this process 2 more times to make the 3 soil for each of your cacti. Okay, so for the tall cactus you want this sort of lime green colour, and we're going to start by doing a slip knot and a chain. I've included a slow tutorial for how to do a slip knot and a starting chain in the description below if you haven't done this before. And you just want to chain 27. Then for round 1 we're going to work into the second chain from our hooks. So we ignore this first chain and then we work into the second chain. And we're going to do a single crochet into that first chain. And insert your stitch marker to mark the first stitch of the row. And then we're going to do single crochets into the next 2 chains as well. Into the next 20 stitches we're going to do half double crochets. It's a half double crochet in US terminology. Again, I've included a slow tutorial for how to do a half double crochet in the description below if you haven't done this before. But as a quick reminder, you yarn over before you insert your hook into the stitch, then yarn over, pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. We want to do this for 20 stitches in total. And then into the final 3 stitches we will do single crochets. Now we're at the end of the row, you want to chain 1 and turn your work. Now for row 2 we're just going to do 26 single crochets, but we're going to work into the front loop only. So if you look at the top of your stitch, you'll see it looks like a V, and there's 2 prongs to the V. The prong closest to you is the front loop, and the prong furthest away from you is the back loop. So we're going to be working into these front loops, or the loops closest to you, rather than into the stitch as a whole. So typically when you'd start a single crochet, you would insert your hook under both prongs of the V, like so. But instead, we're just going to be inserting it under the front prong, like so. So this chain that we've just done doesn't count as a stitch. So we want to insert our crochet hook under the front prong only of our first real stitch and do a single crochet. You want to mark this as the first stitch of round 2. And then just single crochet all the way across, just working under that front prong only. Then again, once you get to the end of the row, you want to chain 1 and turn your work. Now for the third row, we're going to do 3 single crochets in the first 3 stitches, then 20 half double crochets, and then 3 single crochets into the final 3 stitches again. But this time we're going to work into the back loop. So again, this is the front prong, this is the back prong. We want to ignore the chain stitch that we've just done and then insert our hook under the back loop of that first stitch. Move our stitch marker. And we'll do that for the first 3 stitches. And then into the next 20 stitches we'll do half double crochets, again working into that back loop. And again for the final 3 stitches we'll do a single crochet, again still working into the back loop. Chain 1 and turn. And now we're just going to keep repeating this pattern. So for round 4 you're going to do single crochets working into the front loop only. At the end of your row you'll chain 1 and turn. And then for row 5 you'll do 3 single crochets, 20 half double crochets, and 3 single crochets working into the back loop only. And you're just going to repeat this pattern for 10 rows in total. And I'll meet you back here at the end of row 10. Okay, so once you finish row 10 you should have a kind of odd shaped rectangle like so. And now what we're actually going to do is to seam up our tall cactus so that it forms a tube. Now firstly you want to make sure you've got the right side facing out. So the right side is the side that sort of has these neat little plait ridges. On the inside it's a little bit more plain and simple. I mean, if you prefer this side you can of course do it the other way around, but I think this is the intended side to be on the outside. Okay, so to do this you just want to insert your crochet hook under the stitch on the far side of your cactus. Make sure that your yarn is to the back, then yarn over and pull through both loops. And you want to work under the front loop only, so the loop that is closest to you. So insert your hook under that loop and then into the loop of your chain stitch in your initial on the other side of the work. Yarn over and pull through all the way. and then just repeat this along. So under the front loop only on this side of the work, under the chain loop on that side of the work, yarn over and pull through all loops. And just continue this all the way down. So this is an example where this pattern really falls flat because there's no instructions whatsoever about how to seam up the tall cactus, and it took me a while to realize that actually you're supposed to crochet this flat and then seam it together, which I only really figured out by looking at the photographs of the finished product, and because when I tried to do it in the round, the dimensions weren't right. If you prefer, you could also use a tapestry needle to embroider the seam shut as opposed to crocheting it shut. Then once you've finished seaming it up, you want to cut a yarn tail, but you want to leave quite a long yarn tail because we're going to use this to seam up the top of our cactus and to attach the flower. And then fasten off by just yarning over and pulling that yarn tail all the way through. Okay, now to make the flower. So for the tall cactus, you want to use the yellow yarn, and for the ball cactus and the flat cactus, you'll use the pink yarn. We're going to start with the magic circle. So again, hold your yarn tail facing down between your thumb and first finger. Wrap it around your first two fingers, underneath and over the top and across like so. Insert your crochet hook under this top strand. Use the head of your crochet hook to grab the second strand, pull it through, and twist it to sit on top. Then we want to grab this strand here with the head of our hook and pull that through the loop on our hook. And now we're going to do 6 single crochets into the magic circle. I'm going to mark this first single crochet with our stitch marker. Once you've done your 6 single crochets, you can pull on your yarn tail to close up your magic circle. I suggest also marking this last stitch with a stitch marker, just because what's a real stitch and what's not can get a bit confusing with this pattern. Now I've actually changed the pattern here. The pattern, if you do it exactly as it's written, makes something which doesn't look very flower-like to me. So I've modified the pattern to make something that looks more consistent with the final pictures. So to join up round 1, we just want to slip stitch back into the first stitch. So you just want to insert your crochet hook under that first stitch that has the stitch marker, and then do a slip stitch. So yarn over and pull that through all the loops on your hook. Then you want to chain 2. And now we're going to do a double crochet back into that same stitch that we've just worked into. Now in the pattern they refer to it as a treble crochet. That's because they're using UK terminology. However, I'm using US terminology, which is more consistently found on YouTube. I've included a link to a slow tutorial for how to do a double crochet in the description, so check that out if you are new to crochet. However, as a quick reminder, you just want to yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Now we're going to do a second double crochet, again still working into the same stitch. And that's our first little petal. Then you want to chain 2, and now we're going to slip stitch into the second stitch. So insert your hook, yarn over, and pull through all loops. Then we will chain 2 and do 2 more double crochets back into the same stitch. then chain 2 and slip stitch into the next stitch. Chain 2 and then another 2 double crochets into the same stitch. Chain 2 and slip stitch into the next stitch. And repeat this 2 more times. And now we know this is our final stitch, so we'll slip stitch into there and do our final petal into that stitch. So we'll have 6 petals in total. Then you want to chain 2 and slip stitch back into the first stitch to close up that final petal. Now we want to fasten off. So you just want to cut a yarn tail. And then yarn over and pull that yarn tail all the way through. And there's your little flower. Now we just want to weave in our ends for our flower, so we do this in just the same way that we've woven in our ends for the soil. If you want your flower to have a little bit of a hole, then don't pull this initial yarn tail too tightly. If you want to close up that hole, you can pull it a little bit more tightly before you weave it in. Once you've woven in those ends, you can trim these tails. And there's a little flower. Then you just want to repeat this process 2 more times using the pink yarn to make the flower for the other 2 cacti. So the next piece we need to make is the flat cactus. And for the flat cactus, you want this kind of army green. Now the way that the flat cactus is made is very similar to how we made the soil. So we will be working in the round rather than working in rows like we did for the tall cactus. So we want to start the flat cactus with another magic circle. So again, hold your yarn tail facing down, wrap it around your first 2 fingers and into a cross. Insert your crochet hook under this strand, pull this strand and twist it on top like so, and then hook the strand here and pull it through the loop on your hook. And then we'll do 6 single crochets into the magic circle. Once you've done your 6 single crochets, you can pull on the yarn tail, and then we're going to join rounds in the same way that we did for the soil. So you may want to mark this final stitch with another stitch marker. Then you want to slip stitch to join your round back to the first stitch and chain 1. For round 2, you'll do increases in each of the 6 stitches, so you'll have 12 stitches by the end of round 2. So as a quick reminder, an increase just means you do 2 single crochets into the very same stitch. So 1, move your stitch marker, and then a second single crochet back into that same stitch. And you'll do that into each of the 6 stitches for round 2. Then you can just follow the pattern that's written on the screen for rounds 3 through to 16, which are all just combinations of single crochets and increases. And then I'll meet you back here at the start of row 17 to remind you how to do an invisible decrease. Okay, so for row 17, we're going to start doing some decreases. So row 17 will do 5 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease. So you start with your 5 single crochets. Don't forget to move your stitch marker. And then as a reminder for how to do an invisible decrease, you want to go under the front prong only of the first stitch, then swing your crochet hook down so that you can get the head of your hook under the first prong only of the second stitch, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2. Then you just want to repeat this pattern of 5 single crochets followed by a decrease all the way around for row 17. This is also a good time to weave in your initial yarn tail before you start closing up the body of your flat cactus. Now you can follow the instructions on the screen for rows 18 through to row 24 and just fasten off at the end of row 24 like we have for all of our other pieces of work so far. And now for the cactus leaf. This is also done in the same way as the flat cactus and the soil, so we're going to be working in the round, and again you just want to start with a magic circle. Feel free to use the timestamps to go back if you want another slow explanation of how to do the magic circle. And we want to start by doing 6 single crochets into that magic circle. Now that you've got the hang of increases, decreases, and working in joined rounds, you can follow the instructions on the screen to make the cactus leaf, which is just a combination of single crochet and single crochet plus increase rounds until round 6, and then you'll start doing decreases across those last 4 rounds. Okay, now our final cactus to make is the ball cactus. This will be made in the same way as the tall cactus, so we'll actually be working in rows in the flat, and then we'll seam the cactus together. So to begin, you want to chain 17. Again, feel free to check out the tutorial in the descriptions for how to do a slip knot and a chain stitch. Then for round 1, we're going to work into the second chain from your hook, so ignore the first chain and then work into the second chain, and you'll do a single crochet into that chain. And you want to mark this as our first stitch of the row. Then we're going to do half double crochets for the next 14 stitches. So as a quick reminder, you just want to yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And so you'll do that for 14 stitches in total. And then into the final stitch, you'll do a single crochet. Chain 1 and turn. Now every row is 1 single crochet followed by 14 half double crochets followed by 1 single crochet. However, now we're going to be working into the front loop only. So we go just under that front loop and do a single crochet, and then just under that front loop and do a half double crochet, and repeat that all the way across. And then into this final stitch, we'll do a single crochet, but again, just into the front loop. Chain 1 and turn, and then we'll continue this for 26 rows in total. So you start each round with a single crochet, end each row with a single crochet, half double crochets in the middle, working into the front loop only the whole time. Make sure to chain 1 at the end of each row and turn, and you might want to use stitch markers to mark both the first and the last stitch of your row, because it can be really easy to drop stitches, especially because we're using shorter stitches at the end, which can be harder to see. And I'll meet you back here at the end of row 26. So once you've finished row 26, you should have a rectangle like so. And now we're just going to seam our ball cactus up in the same way that we did our tall cactus. The ball cactus is the same on both the right side and the wrong side, so it doesn't matter as much which way is facing out when you start to seam up your ball cactus. but just slip stitch the join all the way along and fasten off at the end. Okay, now we're ready to start assembling our cacti. So to begin with the tall cactus, so you want obviously the tall cactus body, the yellow flower, and one of your soils. And firstly, we're going to attach the cactus to the soil. So you just want to take one of your yarn ends and thread it onto a tapestry needle. And we just want to sew our cactus onto the top of our soil. So I suggest just going through one of your stitches on your soil and then going through one of the stitches on the edge of your cactus, and just continue this in a circle pattern all the way around. So once you've gone all the way around, now we can stuff our soil and our cactus. So you just want to take some of the fibre fill, I would suggest being careful not to overstuff your soil. Now, if you want to make sure that the fibre fill doesn't come out, you could use your tapestry needle to sew this opening shut. However, I don't think it's strictly necessary. Now with the cactus itself, you want to stuff this a little bit more tightly than the soil so that it gives the right shape, but not so tightly that the fibre fill comes out of any gaps in your work. And now that we've stuffed our cactus, we just want to seam up this top and attach our flower. Now I'm going to do this with my leftover green yarn. If you've still got your tail for your flower, then you can use that as well. Now I just suggest seaming all the way across the top of your cactus and then kind of squishing it this way and seaming this way to get more of a rounded shape. And then once it's seamed shut, you can just sew on your flower. Okay, and now that's assembled, we just need to deal with our loose ends. So the way that you can deal with your yarn ends is just to weave them through your stitches, just like we wove our other ends into our work. And then once you've gone through a few different stitches and directions and you're feeling comfortable that your yarn is nice and secure, then what you can actually do is just insert your tapestry needle into your work and pop out somewhere else and pull it all the way through. And then you can trim this tail here and just wiggle your work a little bit, and that end will hide in your work. So you just want to do this with your other yarn ends as well, and that will be our first cactus done. Okay, now for our ball cactus. So we're going to seam this one up in a slightly different way to make sure we get that nice round shape. Now if you have a decent yarn tail in your green yarn, then I suggest using that, but I do not have enough left over unfortunately, so I'm going to use the brown yarn for the end that will be attached to the soil. And we're basically going to create a drawstring to close up our edge of our cactus. So you just want to go up through one of the stitches on your edge and then down through the next stitch. You're actually working along the edge of the work here, so you're really working in rows rather than stitches. And then up. And down. And you just want to keep working this way all the way around. So we're not seaming it together, we're working around the edge of the body of the cactus. And then once you've gone all the way around, we're just going to pull on this yarn tail to basically draw our edge together like a little drawstring. And that'll create a nice close to the bottom of our cactus, which we can now attach to our soil. Now if you want to make sure that your cactus is well centered, then I suggest just making sure you're working around the same row of stitches on your soil. So for me that's the third row. But I think when you're crocheting things like plants, which naturally have a bit of variation, it's actually a mistake to try and be too perfect about it. Actual cactus plants aren't perfectly straight. They are a little bit wonky. They have a little bit of variation. So I think it's a good opportunity to not be quite so perfectionist with finishing off your work. Give it a little bit of character. And once you've gone all the way around, now we can stuff our soil and stuff our cactus. And now we just want to seam up the top of our cactus in the same way that we did the bottom, either using green yarn if you have some, or you can use the colour of the flower, which is the pink yarn. And then we can attach the file. And then we can just hide our ends in the same way by inserting our hook into the body of the work, pulling it through, trimming this off, and just squishing it into the work. And that's our second cactus done. Okay, and our final cactus to assemble is the flat cactus. Now I annoyingly ran out of the green yarn for my flat cactus, so I had to switch to the yarn from my tall cactus. I've had this issue with most of the Kmart kits where they don't include enough yarn in some of the colours to finish your work, which is really frustrating. And it's one of the reasons that I'm creating my own Learn to Crochet kit. So make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss when that gets released. Now our flat cactus will be assembled a little bit differently. We won't put any polyfill into this flat disc because it's flat. And you want to just kind of shape your cactus like so it's got these kind of edges to it. Now the instructions suggest filling your little leaf with polyfill. I don't think this opening is really big enough to do that, and I think it's also got enough body without it, so that's Completely up to you, but I don't think it needs to be filled. So to assemble the flat cactus, you just want to sew your flower onto the end of the little leaf here, and then you can sew the leaf to the side of your cactus, and then just sew the edge of your cactus onto your soil, just like we did with the tall cactus. You still want to put some polyfill into the soil for this cactus, just not into the top. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found this tutorial useful. And if this is your first time trying crochet, I hope that it's got you hooked. If you'd like to say thanks, you can buy me a cup of coffee, linked in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and happy crafting!